Ever wonder how a breakthrough idea actually becomes reality? Hi, I'm Susan Lindner, and this is the Innovation Storytellers Show, where I sit down with the change makers behind the world's most inspiring innovations to learn how they did it and the stories that help them make it happen. If you've ever had a big idea or want to tell yours in a more powerfully connected way, you're in the right place. I promise you'll get new ideas for how to tell a better story to your audiences too. So let's dive in. As you know, I've been doing a storyteller series of folks that I think are the best in the world of storytelling. So why am I bringing on my so-called competitors onto the podcast to introduce all of you into storytelling? And that's because there are bazillion stories in the world, and there are bazillion ways to tell them. And so many of these colleagues of mine who do great work in storytelling have new and interesting perspectives that I want to share with you. I am enamored with these storytellers. I want to learn more from them. And so I feel like this community is always hungry for new and better ways to tell stories. And that's why I'm really excited to have with me here today. Joe Lazer is the fractional CMO at Pepper and the former head of marketing at Contently, where he helped pioneer the content marketing industry, and is the co-author of a best-selling book, The Storytelling Edge: How to Transform Your Business, Stop Screaming into the Void, and Make People Love You. An award-winning content strategist, Joe has been honored by Digiday, The Drum, and so many more. His keynote presentations on the art and science of storytelling have inspired thousands of people to rethink how they build relationships with customers. Joe, thanks so much for joining me today.
Susan, thanks for having me.
So Joe is also the author of a brand new book, and I feel super lucky that he's agreed to come and talk with all of us prior to the book even going to print. So this book is going to be out in March, and I'm going to encourage all of you to get it. It is called Super Skill: Why Storytelling is the Superpower of the AI Age. I think it's going to help all of us to become master storytellers with the help and support of AI. Joe, what prompted writing this book? Why this book? Why now?
Yeah, so I started writing this book. The journey really started 3 years ago when my son Max and ChatGPT were born pretty much at the same time. And so it was in this sort of early light of fatherhood, right, where I had short paternity leave. I had 4 weeks off from running marketing at this AI future of work startup called A Team. And I just started going deep on ChatGPT, right? I worked at an AI startup. We'd already been using generative AI in our team before ChatGPT and some tools, but I was seeing the seismic impact that this was making. The fastest growing consumer app of all time, fastest to 1 million users, 14 times faster than any of the social media 2.0 platforms that I grew up on. And, initially started with this sense of panic, right? Like, what would this mean for me as a content and brand and storytelling driven marketing leader? Would I be able to continue to provide for this small child that I just brought into the world? I worried about it for my son, right? For Max. Would he grow up in this sort of beige world where we outsourced all of our writing and storytelling and art to the machines? Because that was very much the narrative in those early days of ChatGPT. If you remember, every hype artists and prophet on LinkedIn were preaching that AI would put writers and creatives out of work for good, preaching that with a sort of zealousy that we hadn't seen since they were trying to send Dogecoin to the moon. And but it was in the analysts too, right? It was Deloitte was predicting this, Accenture was predicting this, everyone was predicting this. And so much of my work, luckily at my job, involved AI future of work, research about AI in the future of work. Like, the idea of A Team was that we were bringing together really high performing teams to build new innovation products for enterprise customers. We were using AI to form those teams. Big question was, okay, what are the skills that are going to matter in this next stage? So I got the benefit of getting, as part of my day job, to start to do a lot of that research into what skills were actually going to matter in this next stage of work. Like, is this as big of a threat to creativity and storytelling and the skills that I found very fundamental to my life? Were there different skills that you needed to develop to win in this next stage of work, what would that all look like? And as I started digging into it and speaking with future of work researchers, digging into a lot of the early research, talking to economists, talking to a lot of the enterprise CEOs and AI founders in our orbit, a hypothesis started to brew, which was that actually, if you look a few years down the line, and this is speaking from the time of ChatGPT's release, right, of early 2023, probably what we were going to see is that AI was going to get better faster at the technical skills that over the last 20 years we had tried to mimic ourselves as human, right? As humans. So being able to code, because coding is much easier to objectively define as good than writing and storytelling. The ability to use Excel, this seemed to be a skill that we would be able to train AI to do extremely, extremely well in data analysis. And I think especially over the last few months, that's what we've seen borne out, right? Is that AI is doing damn near 100% of the coding in a lot of companies. Claude for
Mm-hmm.
Excel is wild. And companies now are investing really heavily in hiring storytellers that work at sort of the CEO level, right? To instill this differentiated narrative that cuts through the noise across the organization. And ironically, a big prompting of that is the rise of AI slop, which has flooded our feed with so much mediocre content. The
Ugh.
ability to have truly differentiated content becomes really, really big. All of that kind of prompted me on this journey where when I started writing the book, people thought I was relatively insane to be arguing that storytelling would be this super skill of the AI age, that in an age where AI could do most technical skills better than us, our most human skill, which is storytelling, would act as this super skill that would make us better at all the soft human to human relational skills that will matter most in the next stage of work. I think, ironically, now as the book is coming out, the counterintuitive take is maybe becoming a little bit more mainstream, right? But that was the journey that this took me on. And so in the book, I kind of lay out that argument for this shift and then provide 15 actionable principles for becoming a better storyteller in the AI age, split across three fundamental stages. The first is unlock, which is tapping into our innate storytelling superpowers. We're all born storytellers, right? My 3-year-old lives in a world of story, like literally every second of every day. He is in Neverland. Everything is imaginative. And we're all like that as kids. We lose touch of it later on, but we all have these fundamental storytelling skills within ourselves. The second stage is unleash. So taking those storytelling skills and applying them to specific contexts in our work life that are really powerful, developing your big idea, selling, leading, building an audience, and then upgrade. The last section is about how once we develop those core foundational storytelling skills, how do we then use AI as an amplifier and a force multiplier in this really ethical and responsible way where we're still controlling the choices that we make over our creativity and the stories we tell. We're still keeping them human, but using AI in a way that allows us to tell bigger and better and more interesting and experimental stories than we could before, and also take control of our storytelling IP in an age where so much is controlled by the Silicon Valley giants. So broad breadth, that's what inspired me to write the book. And that's the journey that I went on. And it's been a great couple of years just getting to dig into all this research and case studies and talking to so many great storytellers in different disciplines to understand what are these like foundational elements that are going to allow us to be great storytellers and future proof our careers in the next stage of work.
So important. So important. And if AI is doing everything else, the only thing that's not shifting, right, is that you still have to stand up in a meeting and talk about what it is that you do, how you do it better, the new idea that you're bringing to the fore, whether AI helped you get there or not. It's still incumbent upon us as humans to communicate our brilliant new ideas to the rest of the world. And so I am so on board with what you're talking about. Let's dive in a little bit to, and if I can, to frame this in the context of innovation. So the AI itself is an innovation, right? Virtually every person that I interview for the show is on some level talking about AI and how it's about to transform their business. What do you think is the foundational step that as people are starting to talk about AI more and more in the office, where does the storytelling start around AI? If you're communicating innovations that use AI, what do you think is the foundation to build a new story?
That's a fantastic question. So I think you probably have to think about like multiple layers of audience here, right? Because one is the external audience around using AI, and I think we've seen missteps in that over the last few years, where so many companies just slap now with AI onto their packaging. Like literally, we see consumer packaging, right,
New
where
and
it's like a
improved.
toothbrush. Yeah, it's like new and improved with AI, and there's often this really big delta between the way that people inside of corporate America, particularly marketing and technology, think about AI and how normal consumers think about AI. People in the general public like tend to actually not like AI very much. They tend to see it as threatening. They think at very low numbers that it will lead to a better world or a better information ecosystem or a better job market for them. There's a ton of skepticism around AI that we don't necessarily see in our tech and marketing bubble. Like I'll say that I live in this bubble too, and I constantly have to remind myself of what people actually feel outside of it. So that's one thing, right? Where I think often that story is underdeveloped externally. Like the story can't just be, we're now using AI. That is not a differentiated story in any way. Like everyone is saying that. How are you using it in a way that is going to help your customers? And then does, talking about AI even need to be a part of that story? Or is just the story of what is the end result, the change in your customers' lives that you're bringing, the story you need to tell? And then internally, like there's a huge change management issue with AI overall, where it's really scary to a lot of workers. I don't think a lot of CEOs have done themselves any favors with some of these over the top ultimatums that they send to their employees and then boastfully post on LinkedIn as part of this trend of, I'm going to send you an AI is coming for your job memo to everyone that works for me. And that just leads to a lot of fear and not a lot of a feeling that people are being brought along with this AI wave, right? That they're not being shown in a concrete way, or they're not being told a story that shows them about the shared journey that we're on as a company and how we're going to integrate AI into the work that we do, not just as a way to either replace those employees or pile on more and more work onto their plate that already feels unmanageable to do, or to raise expectations of output in this way that are incongruent with the tools that are actually given to them. But this very cohesive and often complex story of transformation of the role that this is going to play in their work lives. And I realize that's often a difficult story to tell, because there are CEOs who under the hood are thinking that I want to use this technology to cut headcount and increase profit margin and all those things. So I think it becomes a more difficult story to tell, because it forces people to dig into what they truly believe and what is their plan actually look like in order to tell a truthful story. But there's really two hard narratives there that are hitting at the same time. And it's often hard to not to do one without another, right? You're probably not going to actually build out that solution that is providing positive value to your clients and the ability to tell a story about it if you don't have it in place internally. And if you can't tell that internal story, honestly, you're not going to have employees that are motivated to get you to that next level. So I think that's the conflict that a lot of companies are feeling right now that I speak with.
So, I mean, I can share my 27-year-old works for a tech company, and he got a mandate from on high that said everyone is to start using AI as part of their job function and report back to your managers how you're using it to make your job better.
That's
And
so vague. Oh my God.
so horrific, right? Because number one,
Yeah.
what is the strategy from on high? Zero.
The
Number two,
strategy is use AI. Yeah. It's like,
your strategy is use AI, figure it out, tell us how it's working, then come back to us and maybe we'll codify it. Right? Not to
it's
mention
like,
that my kid has a job that's in the field. So
okay.
all of his stuff, he's doing quality assurance testing in the field for different tech products, and super regulated industry. There's very little that AI can do to help him when he's physically on site, just testing to see if the thing works. And so
Yeah.
he's like, I tried using AI even to generate the report for when I get back. He's like, it's slop. It's horrible. It doesn't even like communicate the things I want to say. And even if I try to train it, I'm spending more time trying to train the large language model than I am actually getting the work done. And so I think it's just one example of like, I'm having flashbacks to 1998 when every client was like, can you build me a website? I go, what are you going to put on it? And they're like, we'll just copy and paste the brochures.
Yeah. Scan a PDF of those brochures, put them up. Well,
Exactly.
that's the interesting thing about AI, right? Is
Yeah.
that I think it's the first technology that I have experienced, right? Because I was working in my mom's Anna Hospital in 1998 as a child laborer, not
Yeah, at this point, you could cut me open and count the rings for how many different technology waves that I've been through at this point, Joe. But this is just one of many.
I just assume you're a teenager too, working on the tech boom. Yeah,
yeah.
I will say that it's the first technology that I've experienced that is a technology that was at first in search of a business use case, right? Where everyone's like, okay, we have AI. Now let's figure out like what it does for business, right? But this is a technology that just like is hot and that we all know we want to jump onto. And that's not all to say that there isn't tremendous business potential and value in AI, but it's been like inverted a bit, right? In the way that we've gone about it. So you do end up with companies where the metric just becomes using AI. We want to report to the board that we're using AI, right? And so you end up with those sort of vague ultimatums of just like, you have to start using AI. How? We don't know. Like, we just use it and then like tell us how we're using it. And then we'll do a bottoms up strategy to figure out what innovation looks like. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. But, maybe there's a world in which it is possible that using AI could help your kid generate those reports, but they're not being trained or given the right tools to do those things. They're not being given a
it's like
workspace
a hackathon with no direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which
just hack.
It's crazy. Do you feel like people are getting more sophisticated in this now?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's as a result, the same way that the internet was used to do the exact same thing, right? The greatest innovations of the internet came about through gambling and porn, right? Most technologists are pretty aware that those were the driving forces of compression time, speed, of download time, you name it. Those were the desires that were driving those things. AI is a little bit different in that businesses are really driving a lot of the use case. It's not to Chat GPT, right? OpenAI just decided they were going to allow porn, as did Grok, right? So we'll see how fast those platforms wind up evolving as a result of these.
Yeah. Well, right? Also like 73% of ChatGPT usage secretly has nothing to do with work. So there might be more porn driving the innovation of AI than you think. It's also a huge part of the training data, by the way, because they never been able to scale the AI models without it. But I'll let you go. Yeah.
So a lot of people are using it to search medical queries, right? Which to think about, oh my gosh, like how much false information is on the internet, and now you're driving your diagnoses and your questions to your doctor. I feel bad. The doctors used to get information from WebMD and MayoClinic.com, and now it's coming from chat. So it's even more terrifying. But, as we think about how folks need to create stories in conjunction with AI, there's a desire to first put everything they know, put everything that you want to talk about into chat and hope through this magic machine that it just churns out the perfect story for you. Can you give us some steps, Joe, about how you found in working with AI? Now it's been 3 years, right? That you've been looking deeply into this. What is the foundations like? What are the steps that you take when you're beginning to say, I have a story I want to tell. I want to use AI as a companion. How do I begin this process of getting started with AI?
Yeah, so I think about it in 4 stages, and this is something that I lay out in the book and actually used in writing the book, which is what I call, say you're using it for a thought leadership or innovation storytelling initiative, like this thought leadership or innovation story loop, where you have ideation, research, writing, creation, and refinement. And the really important thing in using AI is to avoid what I call the vortex of mid. So I think in using AI, there's an inherent gravitational force towards mediocrity. So if you think of all content on a 2x2 grid axis, right? Where on one edge, you have low originality, high originality, right? And then you have a quality axis that's low quality and high quality. And now most AI generated content, it isn't going to sit quite in a lower quadrant, right? It's not bad per se, but it kind of sits in this mid area, right? Where it's not completely unoriginal because it is, remixing some existing ideas, but it's not highly original. And it's never really low quality. Like AI is a B writer, maybe a B plus writer in some contexts, sometimes a B minus writer, but it's never very good or super interesting compared to the best human writers, right? It lacks the ability to sound truly linguistically distinct, to really surprise you. There's sort of a flatness to it that you can't really avoid. And in a world in which it becomes super cheap to create this mid content, right? The cost of creating mediocre content is essentially plummeted to zero, but in turn, so is the value of that content. So you have all of this content, and when you're using AI, it kind of gets sucked by this gravitational force into this messy middle. But the truth is that if you want to stand out and actually break through, your content needs to sit in that higher upper right-hand quadrant of high originality and high quality. And then the question becomes, how do we do this? And how do we use AI in a way that still allows us to get to that result? Because I'm not, I'm someone who's worked in AI for several years now as a marketing executive, and I'm not anti-AI by many means, but I think the order and intentionality with which we use AI is really, really important. There's the research from, MIT, a lot of folks have seen about how AI overuse or reliance led to like cognitive shutdowns of parts of the brain, right, and decline. But the interesting thing that was also in that study is that when they found that people thought on their own first and then used AI, you actually reached higher levels of cognitive engagement. So much of what's important is that when you're doing original ideation, that you're brainstorming and ideating on your own first, and then you're turning to AI. And when you're writing, if it's something that's intended to be original thought leadership or original storytelling, the rule of thumbs I always give to people is that you should write on your own first. Yes, this is the painful part of the process, but that pain serves a really important purpose because writing is thinking. It's when you realize that this is the piece I should be writing versus this is the piece I should not. This is the idea I should be pursuing versus the idea I should not. It allows you to actually formulate what you truly think and what your unique perspective is in a way that you simply can't get just by dumping a bunch of ramblings into a voice note and giving it to Claude or ChatGPT, as I see a lot of AI thought leaders advocating on LinkedIn. Certainly not something that you can get when you just ask AI to generate your entire outline, right? And just give it an initial idea. That's not really original thinking. So the breakthroughs come in doing part of that human work, but then bringing AI into the process. So at the ideation stage, what we're talking about is brainstorming on your own first, but then AI actually unlocks a lot of the power of creativity inside the human brain, where our creativity doesn't work in these big eureka moments that we see in movies, but actually in these small iterative leaps, right? Where idea A leads to idea B, leads to idea C, which leads to then a breakthrough, right? And
or
that's why
a rabbit hole, right? That winds
yeah.
up going, oh, wow, I never thought about that. And coming
Yeah.
back at, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is why this is like the most effective format of group brainstorming. It's like that's why it can be helpful. Right. And what having AI is like a brainstorming partner that can give you limitless ideas, which is why a lot of the big AI innovation studies, like the one at Procter and Gamble that Ethan Mollick from Wharton has written about a number of times, show that teams that are working with AI and individuals working with AI on ideation and innovation initiatives tend to outperform those that are working on their own in a time box setting, because the AI is just giving you so many ideas that you can generate off of. But your initial cognitive engagement is really important there. And then, okay, once you have initial ideas, you want to go deeper on them. You want to stress test them. Where's there white space around this? Where's there additional research that confirms or contradicts what I'm trying to say? This is where AI, I think, is a really powerful out-of-the-box tool today. Deep research is a fantastic product. It is by far the best, I think, AI content creation tool that we have right now, particularly from a time savings perspective, right? That you can go and get these incredibly deeply researched, precise research briefs from ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude right now that save you so much time in terms of doing academic research and going down the rabbit hole of listening to like podcast transcripts, right? So with really tightly defined parameters, yeah. And this thing I use a ton to find like, obscure kind of quotes or stories from great creative figures who I wasn't able to access in direct reporting for the book, right? Is to find these things of like AI combing through like the most obscure YouTube video, podcast transcripts to find these little gems of moments and stories to tell, as well as academic studies. Now you need to verify all of this, right? You need to click on the links and actually make sure it says what it says before you use it, because AI still hallucinates, but it's a tremendous time-saving tool. When we get to the creation portion, yes, don't use AI to write your first drafts. But if you have those moments where you're stuck on a transition, or what's another way to say this, right? If the choice is then between getting up and going to the fridge and doing your dishes and procrastinating, getting distracted and not continuing the writing, or using AI to help you find what that little turn of phrase is. And often you won't even use what the AI gave you, right? I never do, but often it'll give me another idea of what I should say instead, right? That's a good use of AI. And
That's
then
a
on
good
the
use.
yeah, and then on the refinement stage, it's like the ability to build synthetic personas that represent your audience, whether it's your boss, your customer, your newsletter subscriber, your TikTok viewer, whatever it is, and give you feedback on your content before you publish it, I think is another powerful use case that we can all use, because it gets you outside of your own head. It gives you another perspective. Is it as good as asking another human being? Not always, right? But for something that's immediately available in our computer at all hours of the day, it's pretty freaking magical. So those are, for a lot of day-to-day content creation, that's how I think about using AI. I'm someone who would never publish, you know, in my bylines or books anything that was written by AI. And, if I ever did, I would certainly disclose it. But I feel like the relationship I have with my audience that's just not a line I would cross, or really something that I would want to give up. But I do think there are all of these other really powerful ways that we can use AI to allow us to do better work, to iterate more deeply on our storytelling and creativity, and also get a lot of time back so that we have more of those long blocks to be doing great creative work.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us, there's just, for people who are not inherently writers, or people who that is not their day-to-day function, right? This is kind of the dreaded PowerPoint that needs to be written for the big town hall meeting, or I have to pitch a big idea to, another business team as an innovator and say, like, we want to bring in this cool new opportunity. We want to run a pilot with you guys. But most of the folks I work with have too many PhDs after their name, right? They spend most of their time peering through a microscope, looking at electrons, or looking at different specimens than they do certainly a keyboard and writing. So for audiences, that are not writers first, do you still think that the ideation starts with, let me just sketch out a brief skeleton and then go from there?
I do,
Yeah.
because I think it's a fundamental skill that you want to develop and always be getting better at. There's even research from, Anthropic that just came out that the use of AI on a lot of skill set tests lead to a 17% reduction in mastery. But if you're cognitively engaged with whatever that task is with AI, those losses are reversed, right? So if we know this is going to be an important skill that you need to have, right? If you know that you're going to have to be able to get in front of the boardroom and on the fly sometimes be able to craft that narrative around why you're pitching is important, you need to be honing these skills. Like your ability to do a lot of the rote technical tasks of your job in any field are going to become less valuable as AI commodifies those skills. So we all need to be working on these core human storytelling narrative skills, even though we're not all trying to be authors or LinkedIn thought leaders or, TikTok stars, right? We all need to be working on these. It helps you figure out what is the core ideas you actually want to be pursuing. And then you can have that conversation with AI to refine it. I'm not saying there's any limits, right, on how you might edit that outline after you engage Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT. But that initial work will just make you much better over the long run and produce a higher quality of work overall. And then there are also past that are simple narrative structure tricks or frameworks that I think anyone can learn that will help them tell better stories in different contexts. There's
What are
simple.
some of those that you use, Joe?
The easiest one for anyone to use is called Man in a Hole.
Okay.
This is one of Kurt Vonnegut's Shapes of Stories, which is the easiest and probably most popular story arc of all time, which is a man, and it needs not be a man. It could be a man, a woman, a non-binary person, right? But gets into trouble and has to get their way out of it. This is most of our favorite narratives, right? So think of we were on this path. We got into trouble. Our market has been disrupted. This is then the way that we are on a pathway to getting out of it, right? Or boy meets girl, which is something goes well, meet the romantic partner of our dreams, but then things go poorly, and then we have to get our way out and win them back over, which can be used again in innovation settings or career arc ways of saying in a lot of easy ways, right? Things were going well for us. Then we had this big disruption that hit. We got into trouble. We had to find our way out. And here's the journey that we went on. And here's what the promise end looks like at the end. Another simple framework for kind of communicating big ideas is simply thinking through your lens and promise, right? So this is what a lot of founders who are successful at communicating their vision do really well, which is saying, here's the unique way that I see the world that's different, right? This is my unique perspective that breaks through conventional wisdom. And here is then my promise of how your life is going to be better if you adopt my viewpoint and POV. So this is what most really successful nonfiction business bestsellers do, right? Start with why is this counterintuitive perspective that it's not the how of a company that matters. It's the why behind it that really unlocks all innovation. And if you adopt my mindset and you start to see the power of why, you will be able to communicate the purpose of your company in a way that wins over customers and makes your employees super happy and unlocks tremendous growth. You know, James Clear with Atomic Habits, his lens is that habits really come from identity of saying this is the person I want to become, and then making tiny micro changes through a system that allow you to unlock better habits. And his promise is that if you adopt this framework and you take an identity-based approach to better habits and make all these tiny micro changes through this 4-step system that I am promising, you will become a better, more productive, happier person. And with founders as well, right? The promise of the lens of ChatGPT and OpenAI was that we can unlock AGI and we can moonshot AI forward through this once relatively obscure idea of scaling large language models with all of the text and language on the web. And that's a portal to language. And the promise of if we invest blindly billions of dollars in this, we're going to unlock the next stage of AI innovation and super hyper productive, economically valuable technology, right? Like a lot of founders use this like simple lens promise combination. And when it comes to innovation storytelling, like maybe that's a really good place for a lot of people to start, right? In articulating your big idea. And then you take simple narrative story shapes, whether it's Man in a Hole or Boy Meets Girl or Cinderella, and I go through in different scenarios how to use different ones in the book to then translate that big idea into a narrative that hooks people in. So a lot of this stuff like isn't complicated, right? Like my 3-year-old gets a lot of this, right? He's already started telling stories that are Man in a Hole story. Someone gets in trouble, they have to get out. We all have an instinct for this inside of us. We just need to remind ourselves that this is something we actually can do and we're secretly better at than we think.
You know, I often remind my audiences that, work is the only place where you stop telling stories. As soon as you step into a meeting room with other colleagues, suddenly you turn into 3 bullets and an Excel spreadsheet and no one knows why. You certainly go home and don't explain your day to your significant other with a PowerPoint. Like work.
Well, you don't. That's what we do every night. This monitor here.
Step 1, step 2, step 3.
Yeah. So how was your day? My day was good, fun, not too bad. How was yours? Next slide.
Next slide. Exactly. Oh, some days it might have been easier, gotta say.
Yeah.
in the motherhood department.
Yeah.
Let's
right.
talk about your chores. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, you don't want this hot dog I just made you that you told me you wanted 3 minutes ago? Okay, what else would you want? Oh, you refuse to tell me? Okay, great.
By the same token, for a lot of my innovators, getting research and getting it accurately, like I put it to ChatGPT, who is Susan Linder, and it told me I'm the author of 2 books, which was news to me because
congratulations, that's great.
I'm in the process of writing my first, so how it knew this about me was already pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've seen huge gaffes, right, taking place at the highest levels of government where RFK Jr. cited all of these nutrition studies that were actually never existed, that
Gotta
and
click on those links.
yeah,
I'll
exactly.
check it. Yeah.
Someone check the links. So what are some of the pitfalls in working with AI when you're storytelling that you need to be really cautious about?
Well, that's
Whether it's
one,
giving or getting
right?
information. Yeah.
That's one, is that the hallucinations, they've gotten better. It's actually insane to think back at how high they were when ChatGPT first came out. And we were just like, okay, this is acceptable. Like it was, north of 30% at first,
Mhm.
but now GPT-5, like it's below 10%. I'm curious to see what it is on Claude Opus 4.6, which is, there'll probably be a better model by the time that this airs in 4 weeks. But right now, as we speak in mid-February, that's the top model. They've gotten better, but they're not perfect, right? So both, if say you're pulling in external third-party research, certainly to the RFK example, you need to be
Mhm.
checking every single study
Reference.
that it cites, because AI is programmed to be helpful, and that helpfulness leads it to try and give you the answer that you want, even if that answer is not truthful or factual.
It's the answer that it thinks you want.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, she's really looking for a stat for this study. Like RFK really wants these nutrition stats that are going to promote his very specific worldview on, how we should be eating, which honestly is like maybe one of the least insane things he's put out. But that's another,
Yes.
that's another topic. Nutrition facts aren't like actually that bad. But so it's more likely to make up or try and twist a study to give you what you want, right? And one of the smartest things you can just do in using AI is when you're setting up, like, say, a project in Claude or ChatGPT or in Gemini, it's a gem, creating enduring instructions for the AI model for your research use case
How do you
to
do that?
not. You can, when you're creating a project in Claude or ChatGPT, which is like, this is like what I'm going to use this workspace essentially for this one specific use case. So I'll have one for like my book, for specific clients, for my podcast, for my newsletter, for my LinkedIn, when I'm like trying to get AI feedback or do research on things. You just set this up in the instructions for it, and you say, don't make up information just to please me, always be factual, never try and generate false information because you think that it's going to make me happy or help me. Fake information or false information is never helpful. And it's one thing that Anthropic has called out as greatly reducing hallucinations. There's actually, if you want to get really mind-blowing creepy, there's increasing evidence now through interpretability research, which is basically the ability to do brain scans on AI models because we don't know what's going on inside of them. But this new technique through interpretability, and this one company, Goodfire, has pioneered a lot, has allowed us to start doing that, is that the AI models actually know when they're hallucinating. They know when they're making something up. They have a deeper worldview and understanding of this. And so by instructing them not to do that, you greatly reduce the amount of hallucinations you're going to get. So have those instructions, but then also be on the lookout for those hallucinations. And don't think that just because you give it first party data, so like an interview that you did or research that your company has done, that means that it won't hallucinate, because it still will hallucinate sometimes. It still will take a quote from an interview and change it or twist it in a way that might get you in trouble later on. I've seen this happen with my team before, especially in the early days of AI, when that would happen pretty much constantly. Now it's a bit better, but will still happen sometimes. So you have to be on the lookout for that. And then everything I called out
Hey,
earlier.
Joe, I feel like this is the epitome of mansplaining. Or it's like it's like I would prefer to make up an answer rather than say I don't know, or I
Yeah.
can't find what you're looking for, or no thank you, or I'm
The
sure
AI is
there's
just
someone else.
mansplaining. I was like,
Yes,
oh no, am I mansplaining AI to you right now? Oh
no,
God.
absolutely not.
Just trying
I'm
to answer the
learning a lot.
question. Yeah.
I'm learning a lot. You are not mansplaining. I'm talking about
Okay.
the AI mansplaining.
I'm a good Brooklyn boy, I swear. I'm trying not to mansplain.
Because it's so funny to me, like some of the resources that it shows me when I actually click through, it's like, oh, this is a Reddit conversation between two num-nums who are arguing about the dumbest thing ever. But to me, it's citing it is like as imperial fact, and
Yeah,
it's hysterical. You really do
that's
have
a
to
really
click through.
funny, yeah, that's a really funny analogy. Well, I would say Two, telling it what type of sources you want is really important. So saying, I want you to look at academic studies, I want you to focus on these sort of publications. That's very helpful too. I want you to troll through, podcast interviews and things like that to uncover gems if that's a specific thing you're looking for. And then there's specific models that are good for scientific research. There's like consensus and elicit, which is focused more purely on academic journals and research portals. So those are great if you're really trying to cut out all of the Reddit slop that's out there. That's unfortunately increasingly
because it's
AI
just
generated.
so voluminous that
Yeah.
that the AI cannot ignore it, right? I mean, it's just Reddit is such a huge source.
Yeah, but you can't ask it to restrict that. I do think that we're going to look back at this era of AI and just be like, what the hell? Like the amount of hoops that we ask people to go through to jump through to use it well will seem absurd, or the idea that we had people needing to set up AI inside of the terminal of their computer to use it effectively, like with Claude Code, is going to seem crazy, or setting up, separate, basically running completely separate environments on a Mac Mini so that what is it? Oh my God, I'm blanking on the name of the lobster Claude one. The thing that created the viral network of 180,000 agents all talking to each other.
Mod book, or is that what it's called?
No. Oh God. It was Motbolt, or yeah, it was the network, but then it's Bullclaw. I'm going to look this up in a second. But anyway,
Okay.
it's an AI training assistant or an AI assistant that's really powerful, but we have no idea how safe it is because it's completely open source. So people are running it on separate computers. And so this entire era, I think, is going to seem insane in a few years when we have actually more consumer friendly products. The thing I give Claude and Anthropic a ton of props on right now is that I think they're actually starting to do that in a smart way for work. Like Claude for Excel and Claude for PowerPoint are just the first like logically named AI offerings that we've gotten.
There's some really fantastic AI platforms that I've been playing around with from China that I think are really amazing, especially if you're trying to create physical PowerPoint presentations. Kimi is one. I don't know if you've tried.
I haven't.
That's doing a great job. Like some of these they're really going to give OpenAI a run for their money, I think, because there's so much competition now. They have the most money and they're out in front, but there are a lot of niche players, just like anything else, like any other market, that are going to evolve to do certain parts of this process better than others.
Yeah, I'm pretty bearish in OpenAI long term. I think that Google is set up better in a lot of ways. And yeah, and I think that Anthropic has a much better work product.
Interesting. Time will tell. Did you ask ChatGPT what it thinks of that notion?
So probably would tell me that I'm wrong. All of the AI models really like themselves. It's one thing that I've learned speaking with all of them. They all think they're the best.
I want to get to this last part of your book, which I found really fascinating, which is the upgrade part. So you already told us about beware the vortex of mid, which thank you for the millennial speak. Gen X over here is just going like, oh, mediocre, got it, middle of the road, thanks. Okay.
Hey, I defined it in the book.
You did. We appreciate you. Thank you for the glossary for us old folk. You really begin to spell out how to automate the busy work, right? You talk about how to iterate with intention, which is how to keep going back to the process. So it may look a little bit like slop when you first get started, right? It's not exactly where you want it to be. You've started with your great idea. You've iterated. You may have used AI to do some of the research. You've gone into writing, but the iteration part, right? And maybe even where we bring some of our own content to social media, where we want to share it, where we want to scale it. Talk to us a little bit about that next phase of when I have my stuff written, now what?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two stages to this. One is that great creative work requires time. So one of the best things about AI is to take so much of the shallow work and busy work in our lives off of our plate, the things that don't really matter that we're doing, that we're doing it a bit half-brained, right? That we can do while we're listening to a podcast. So we take those things off our work. We have more time for creative work. That alone unlocks a lot for us. And then I think the question is, how do we not just create the same content we would have created before AI, right? With AI faster, because that is just a race into the heart of the vortex of mid and isn't going to stand out. But how do we tell the stories that we couldn't otherwise? with that added creative time that we were giving ourselves by automating a lot of the busy work in our lives, but also thinking about this technology as tools, as a powerful tool. George Lucas has this great quote at the All Things D conference in 2007 when he was being interviewed by Kara Swisher, where he talked about sort of the nature of new technology. Because he said that all storytelling is technological, right? The camera is technological, sound is technological, color is technological, even writing itself is technological. The pen, the paper, the capacity for language, it's a cognitive technology. And every time we get a new type of technology, whether it was the first camera for photography, it was the motion picture, it was radio, it's new storytelling innovations online, right? We go through this sort of garbage cycle where at first we abuse the technology, right? We try and figure out what it's good for. You see a lot of slop, you see a lot of crap work. When people get a new toy, he says the instinct is just to abuse it. And then we start to see what it's good at and bad at and what the attention market and the taste market bears out. And then we calm down and we start to refine what we output. And you do get really interesting types of storytelling and art out of it. And I think in the best case of AI for us, right, this is how we can think about using it, where we can tell stories that we couldn't tell before. On a really simple level, you can see already when I talk to folks in advertising and folks in Hollywood on how AI is enabling a lot of CGI effects that were just financially impossible before, right? Where we can use this technology to do CGI in a faster and more efficient way, where we can do motion animation that previously had to be fully computer programmed with these AI tools. And we can start to tell stories without nearly as much funding or capital or need to have the approval of the gatekeepers of the industry to make them possible. So I think that's one area that we can look at. And like, yes, does it suck that some people working in CGI studios are probably going to have to adapt because you just need less people working on this stuff? Yes, but this is also the pace of technology that we tend to see, right? Where we have new tools come in that make it faster and more efficient to do these sort of graphics. And then it just expands the amount of stories that can get told overall, though, as a result. You can also think about using these tools within their limitations and what they're good at and making all the creative choices along the way. So I'd say like bad use of AI is I'm just going to like prompt Gemini to make this ratchet, creepy, uncanny valley film with these synthetic humans. But a good use is thinking like frame by frame, second by second, shot by shot. How can maybe I use this technology to tell an animated story that's really interesting and not creepy, but allows me to communicate an idea that previously I would have needed hundreds of thousands of dollars to hire motion animators to create, but now I can do it myself. And what does that unlock for me? From a storytelling perspective, so much of what's important is that we are continuing to make each of those creative choices along the way, right? That what makes storytelling and art meaningful is not just the story is being told, but the fact that the story comes from me or that it comes from you, that our lived human experience is informing it. And when we're writing or we're making a film, so many of the things that are important in that story and that make it meaningful are the choices that we are making as the creator step by step. And when you just do a one-shot prompt to AI, you're giving up so many of those choices and you're taking away a lot of that meaning behind your story.
Right.
So how do you take like that core, that original story that you've pulled out from your own experience, from your reporting, from your research, and then how do you stay in control of making all of those tiny choices about how that story is told in a very intentional way, but use the technology to tell that story in a way that just would have been impossible otherwise? Like that's how we get to something that's great. And if what you're creating isn't great right now, it's not going to stand out. You are going to drown in the sea of slop that's out there. So that's the level that I really encourage us all to pursue. And intentionally in the book, I frame this, less as this is how we use it with the specific tools right now. Because even the tools, when I shipped the final copy of the book a few months ago are different by small degrees than they are now. But it's more that framework for how to think about it and plug in whatever the latest AI technology is today. That's important, and I think that's how we need to be constantly applying this technology as new and more powerful tools come out.
Yeah. And that's why I think frameworks are so important. Whether you're doing your storytelling with a pen and paper, the frameworks that you can help guide these AIs through is super helpful too, because at a minimum, you're starting with your ideas, you can guide them in a process and then continue to iterate as you get to the end of the story that you're working on. I love this piece. We didn't get too much into it, but I love this other part about stepping into the shoes of your listener. So in my groups, I do a lot of empathy mapping, is really trying to
Mm,
get into the full persona of the person and what motivates them, what drives them. For us innovators, it's thinking about not just the agony that people are suffering through in the status quo, but also what's the agony of implementing the new innovation, that you might be suggesting. It's painful to change from going through what was to what could be. And so a story for me is the only bridge that helps people get there, but only if we really understand what matters to our listener. And I know you also have a piece in this book, better listening, right? It's not just that the AI has to become a better listener of us. It's that we fundamentally have to be better listeners to be better storytellers.
yeah. Yeah, it unlocks our creativity through that empathetic connection to the person we're creating for. It triggers the release of oxytocin and dopamine and spurs our creativity, and on a neurological level unlocks us. But then also, if you just want to build stronger relationships with people, which is going to be the most important skill of this next stage overall, it's why storytelling is so powerful. Listening to stories is as important as telling stories. Research shows that when we actively listen to people, their perception of us, their feelings towards us skyrockets, right? It's actually the most effective way to actually build connection with someone is through the exchange of stories, but exchange there is really important, right? Where I'm not just sharing my story and my vulnerable moments, inviting you to do the same, but I am actively and locked in listening to your story. And when we do that, the neurons in our brain literally sync. It's called mirror neurons. It's the craziest thing that storytelling literally syncs our brain together. And it just makes us so much more connected. So if you want your boss or CEO to love you, listening intently and using some of the techniques I talk about in the book to pull out their story is one of the most effective things you can do.
Yeah. I'm reading this book right now by David Brooks called How to Know a Person. And he said you should
Mm,
listen as with the intensity as though you were doing open heart surgery and with the full
mm,
intention of listening fully and not responding. And he goes through, I'm an anthropologist by training. And so he goes through and he talks about how different cultures actually, what is their pause rate after hearing someone speak? And the Japanese have the longest time frame of waiting before responding to what you've said. And so it's 7 seconds on average that people wait
wow.
after speaking. As a New Yorker, that's like, is this person even hearing me if I have to wait 7 seconds for a response? But it's amazing what a pause does, even if you're in a meeting, by the way, or if you're telling a story or listening to a story, to just pause and look intently at the person after they've spoken before you start speaking. Everything shifts. Everything shifts.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating research. Yeah. Well, people's inclination is usually to fill the space. So you'll often get more from them by pausing.
That's right. And it makes you look smarter, by the way. That's what surveys say. It makes you look smarter if you pause and listen, because you probably are getting smarter. Your brain is actually getting filled with the content from your chatting partner.
Now I'm just really thinking about how long I'm pausing after you stop speaking.
What? No, I'm kidding. All right. This has just been a fabulous conversation. I'm now going to ask you the three most important questions in the world, which are the questions I ask everyone who comes on Innovation Storytellers. Number one, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
Oh man, God, that's a great question. I think I have to say the capacity for human language that we developed around 100,000 years ago when we had a genetic quirk that allowed us to start to pronounce vowels and syllables. That's what brought us from a mid-rate species to the ultra dominant social learning machines who have rose to conquer the earth, is that capacity for language to rally each other around shared stories, to work together. It's what's allowed us to build civilization, to go to the moon, to rally people around causes, to drive every innovation that we've had since. So let's go with the first one, the fundamental innovation of humanity.
Yeah, and language. Yes, absolutely. We're here to dispel the myth that innovation happens in the company of one. Rather, teams are what generate great innovation. So if you had the opportunity to join any innovation team in human history, which team would you have joined?
I'm really fascinated by the period in which Steve Jobs came back to Apple after being exiled and going and starting Next, which has led to this really rapid turnaround. We got the iMac, we got the iPod, the iPhone in quick succession. But that first year where things were just being torn apart at Apple and rethought from the ground, scrap the entire product line, rebuild it, change the world. To be a fly on the wall on that team and to see if I could survive it or whether Steve would fire me would be a great moment to go back to. And also like the late 90s were just so much less stressful than today.
What? I was in the late 90s. It's stressful. I think I got home work before 1:00 in the morning any night working in tech.
I mean, I would take that for the more chill geopolitical climate that we could be in, let's just say.
Politics, right.
Yeah.
The last question is, this is a question for all my storytellers in this series, is what is the story that the world needs now?
I'm thinking about this one. The story I think the world needs now, I think, is a story of how we're actually going to plan to adapt to what AI is about to bring upon us. I had on my podcast just now this founder, Dan Balsam of this AI lab, Goodfire. I talked about it a little bit earlier, and he described the moment that we're in is a sort of hypersonic bubble from Silicon Valley stuck in a tub of molasses, right? We have this technology that's getting increasingly more powerful, that's able to program itself, that I think is going to bring tremendous disruption to the world. And we have this tub of molasses that's slowing it down. Honestly, it's a good thing right now because we're not ready for the rate of change. And that's just how hard it is to change things inside of corporate America. And right now, that's actually a good thing as someone who's not an AI accelerationist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And that's people. We are the molasses, right? We are the slowing down mechanism for this technology.
Yeah, and it's the process and it's the bureaucracy. Yeah, but it ultimately comes from people. But that's not good. Molasses isn't going to hold it back forever. And we're just really not prepared for what this means in terms of job displacement, reskilling, how we think through the way that we adapt to society. So I'm really eager to see someone who can articulate what that vision looks like on a broader societal level. I'm curious to see if it's something that comes out in the run up to, the 2028 presidential election, that a leader is actually able to articulate that, because I think that narrative is really going to dominate our cycle. If I was being self-serving, I would say it's the story of my book and the reskilling around your storytelling skills, because I do think that storytelling is the most powerful skill that we can adopt to be happy and working in life. But if I'm being completely honest, the former is a more important story for someone to be telling right now than the one in this fun book that I've written.
Yeah, great answer. Joe, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can follow my newsletter, The Storytelling Edge, on Substack, storytellingedge.substack.com. If you reply to any of my emails that I send out, I will get back to you, and happy to talk storytelling anytime. If you go to joelazer.com/superskill, you'll find a bunch of bonus offers if you get the book in these first few weeks after release. I think you'll love the book. I hope you order it. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I am embarrassingly active on there, and also, usually pretty fast to respond to DMs most of the time if I'm not on the road. And really appreciate you having me on.
So thank you so much. One of my favorite storytellers. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
I'll talk to you soon.
I truly hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that could inspire your own. And if you want to learn more about me or how I can help you and your team to become master storytellers to get your big idea to its finish line, head over to innovationstorytellers.com and schedule a call with me.